Hey there, and welcome to this tutorial about how to draw snow leopards. I really enjoyed drawing them, especially because of their fluffiness and beautiful fur pattern. And I hope you will too by the end of this video. So let's get right to it. Thank you. I'm going to start with the head, and we slightly look at it from the side. And for that, I'm drawing this oval shape. Why do I choose to draw an oval and not a circle for the basic shape of the head? If we look at the skull from the side, you are able to see that you can roughly simplify it with an oval. Its height is about 60% of the longest length. Of course, it is not perfect. We will have to make some small adjustments later. But I personally have an easier time drawing their heads this way, rather than using circles and adding the snout in front of it. I would say it's just personal preference. Do whatever works best for you. I'm also going to add the center lines, which will be quite helpful to add all the facial features. Like so, horizontally and also 2 times vertically. And I also like to add this line here that is connected with both of these intersection points at the side, and it will help us determine the position of the eyes. In order to explain their facial structures in a more comprehensible way, I made 2 sketches of a head from the front and side. With what you start doesn't matter all that much, but I personally like to start with the nose, and for that we draw this wide triangular shape, and also the nose bridge, which follows basically the same direction as the center line here, has these 2 straight lines, which more or less have a constant width. Right here, where it touches this line that we drew before, I'm going to curve around and draw these indications for their eyes. Then I draw a small line downwards and an upside down Y shape. Curve around to connect with the nose corners. Over here too, but I'm stretching a bit further. The mouths aren't that large though, so I'm drawing it rather compact. Now let's do some adjustments for the head shape. First of all, here I'm going to subtract a little bit here at the side. And then go around like so. And also down here it slightly extends over the oval shape and converges back. As for the ears, what I normally do is start from the middle of the eyes and draw these guidelines that are parallel to the center line here. And at a point that is fairly close to the back of the head, as you can also see here, I'm going to put down the inner corners of the ears. From there you draw a straight line at an angle, curve around, the height is slightly above the top of the head, and then leave a small gap. You don't draw it all the way, otherwise it would look a little bit weird. And at the other side we draw an ear that is turned away from us. Therefore we draw a straight line, again at an angle, and then the back of the ear, which is basically just forming a triangle shape, but not perfectly, it is slightly wider at the base. And then you can add some indications for the head shape, because they have a quite round looking head. I switched now to a sketch that I already prepared beforehand, and will continue doing so in this video. This way I can make sure that I have good looking and accurate drawings for you. Next up is the rest of the body. At first we're going to draw the very basic skeletal structure. This will help getting the proportions and general pose right. To give you a better comparison, here you can see a drawing of the skeleton that I made. The pose is very simple and it only shows one side of the legs, but it is enough to show most of what we need to know. I am going to compare the size of the individual body parts with the length of the head. So this length of the oval shape, plus a little bit extra since we look at it slightly from the side. Starting with the neck, I'm planning on drawing this snow leopard with its head fairly low, and the length of the neck is slightly shorter than the head length. So this is where the shoulders would be, and from there we measure about 3 lengths of the head, 3 units, which are going to form the spine. So about like this and this and this much. It doesn't have to be perfect, just roughly 3 head lengths. Continuing with the shoulders, here the shoulder blades can slightly move independently from each other, therefore I always keep them separated. They are slightly shorter than the head length, and when they are standing straight, they are pointing forwards. and the upper legs are angled backwards, and the length is about as long as the head length. And the lower legs have basically the same length as the upper legs. I'm keeping the perspective in mind, therefore the lower we are, the more this distance here is increasing. Some small parts for the feet, and some placeholders for the paws. Let's continue with the hip. For that, I normally draw this kind of curve with the joint down here, and that both sides of the hip cannot move independently from each other because it's just one singular bone. Now, one thing you can do if you already know where the ground is start with the feet and then work yourself upwards. So for example, I'm going to choose one over here, and let's say the other one right here. And now we draw this part of the foot, which is slightly shorter than the head length, and these angles here are already predefined because it depends on where the feet are in relation to the hip. So the further they are at the back, the more vertical this angle becomes. So here we have the joints. I'm going to add a little bit extra here, and the rest is just simply connecting the dots. The upper and lower leg have the same length, and they are both slightly longer than the head length. Therefore, we just need to figure out the right angle so both of the bones are gonna be the correct length. So about this here. Of course, we cannot forget the tail, which is about the same length as the spine, so 3 times the head length. And when they are relaxed, they normally have this sort of curvature. And one thing you can do, which is optional, is to add an indication for the rib cage above the knees and connecting with the middle of the spine. Now here is the complete first prepared sketch phase. Next up, let's add more details on top of it. I start once again with the nose. Down here we have this small V shape, then curving upwards at a slight angle, and then from this nose corner here we draw a curve hooking around and connecting with the front over here too, but slightly flatter because we look at it from the side. Add the shadow, and the shadow is going to stretch all the way up towards the nose corner, because there is still a small gap right here in this corner. On the other side too, and also do not forget this line here in the middle. For the top of the nose we start right in the middle of this line and draw a very flat wave shape. I'm curving around, it is not a sharp corner, and draw the nose bridge. Here I have a sketch of a snow leopard's eye for you. There are a couple of things to consider when drawing their eyes in a somewhat realistic way. First of all, their pupils are circular and not slit-shaped like smaller cats'. The eyelids have a certain thickness, so when you draw an eye in detail, make sure you add some depth to the lids too. Here we look at it from the right, therefore you can especially see the depth of the lids on the left side. The iris and pupil are more or less flat, while the transparent cornea in front of those is round. This adds some extra depth, which you can emphasize by using shadows. And the color of the iris is usually pale green, blue or grey. I'm not coloring anything yet, since I still need to continue the sketch. So let's draw the eyes. And first the inner eye corner, which is slightly curving inwards. And how you draw the upper lid decides what kind of emotion they are showing. So if it's flat, then they could be tired or just simply relaxed. But if you draw it very wide and round, then it can be excited or playful or even terrified. Then from this corner below the upper lid, we draw this circle. And it is cut off at the top, can also be slightly cut off at the bottom if the eye is very narrow. At the bottom I'm continuing with the eye corner once again, and I am going to leave a gap between the eye and this line that I'm drawing, because I want to have an indication for the eyelid. So I'm adding some depth, which is important to make the eye look more three-dimensional. You can see that the gap is larger here on the left side, while on the other side it is converging with the circle. Of course, we don't want to forget the pupil, which is this round shape, and repeat the same thing on the other side. but this time it is also cut off by the nose bridge. So we need to take that into consideration. Then I draw the mouth, which is basically just following the lines that I drew before. I can add a little bit more curvature right here at the front. And I draw all the way until the mouth corner, and from there I can only draw some slight indications, but I'm not filling out the whole shape. For the chin I can add this corner here at an angle, and the chin here, very simple. The whiskers are growing out of these rows, and the top row is where the nostril is located at the same height, and the others are lower. There is a gap between the top row and the lower rows. Make sure that you add some curvature to these rows. And then the whiskers themselves. At the front you normally have this shorter hair, and then curving around. And add some variation, make the length and also the orientation different for each hair. So here in this example I'm drawing the snow leopard with its mouth closed. To teach you more about their teeth and how to draw them with their mouth open, let me briefly show another extra sketch I made. So first of all, to draw a mouth opened, you should know where the hinge is located. Right here, closely behind the center, in the lower back quarter of their head. Both of these sketches are of a snow leopard yawning. You can tell by their eyes being closed, their tongue stretched forward with their tip curving up. And if they would be growling instead, then they would push up their cheeks, further exposing their intimidating teeth and making their nose bridge wrinkle up. The teeth structure is basically the same for all cats, large and small. At the front you have the 6 incisors and 2 canines on each side. Then you have a gap which is larger at the bottom, followed by the premolars and the molars at the very back. Those are more like chunks of teeth, which get progressively larger the further they are located at the back. If drawing from the side, you curve down from the nose, stay relatively flat, until you get to the mouth corner, strongly curving down, and then progressively get flatter. If these sketches made you yawn, then I'm sorry. Alright, next up let's focus on the head shape, basically following the shape that we already have. For the ears, first of all here, this one is going to be very simple. I'm just adding a bit of extra hair, some long hair in front of it. And here I'm adding a slight corner, going up, back around. And here I also want to have a corner with some extra skin that is folding whenever they are turning or folding their ears. I'm adding some hair that is curving inward at the sides, like so. On this side a bit fainter. And then some strands right in front of it, with this part here being dark. Some shadows here. And then I just simply continue going downwards and sketch out these strands of fur. You can add here and there some extra detail, especially right here at the center of the forehead. They have this sort of ridge. Oh, and one thing that I have forgotten, which is still very important. At the back of the ear, they have these patches, these spots of white fur sticking out like so. Once again, here is the prepared version, looking much better. Let us continue with the rest of the body. And I'm drawing the paws. In order to simplify them, I'm drawing this large oval shape. They have very large paws. And then I draw some indications of the individual toes. Like so. You can have it sectioned off into 4 parts, although the 4th part will be mostly hidden behind the 2nd toe. And while they're just normally standing, this is basically their shape. They have these round looking paws. I skipped ahead because all of these paws are drawn basically the same way. From this pose you cannot see how the paws are structured in detail. Therefore I prepared more extra sketches. Similar to what I already showed, you can start with a very simple oval shape. Just make sure that you flatten it at the bottom. I sectioned the front of the paw into 4 parts for the individual toes. The paw pads can be simplified with little ovals too. They are located not all the way at the front, but you leave a little bit of space for some fur. The center paw pad, the largest one, is not that simple, but still not that complicated either. You start with a long oval in the middle and then add 2 smaller ones at the sides. Alternatively, you can draw 2 rectangular shapes at the sides at an angle, and at the upper corners you curve them around. Keep in mind that the back and front paws are different from each other. First of all, the paw pads of the back paws are slightly larger, but the front paws have carpal pads at the back of the ankle, slightly off-center towards the outer side of the leg. They also have dew claws on their front feet, which are kind of like their thumbs. However, as long as they aren't stretching out their toes, it remains hidden underneath all of that fluff. And now with more details. The claws are in the middle of the individual toes. They are normally retracted and hidden by the dense fur. When they are extended, make sure to draw the fur around them shoved to the sides. Depending on the view angle, some fur is covering the paw pads. The smaller paw pads basically keep their oval-like shape. For the large one, some small adjustments are needed though. At the front, subtract a small part so it looks like a little wave curve. To add the proper depth, draw small curves so that these shapes overlap each other. And in general, make it look like the paw pads are embedded into the dense fluff. The overall shape of the paw is very round, and the individual toes don't really stick out all that much, so only include some very small corners. Alright, let's continue with our sketch. I'm planning on building upwards and draw these individual shapes. First here for the foot, then for the lower leg, which gets slightly wider further up, like so, and just curving around the joint. Then, in a similar way, here at the chest, curving around and keep it fairly wide. The legs are really wide and thick, and therefore we need to draw these big shapes. And then the shoulder, once again, also curving around. And these shapes are like very simplified muscle packs. Let's skip the head to draw the other side, since it basically works the same way. For the neck, we draw this line below the chin and connect it with the chest. And also from here, from the top of the head towards the shoulders. Then from here, I basically follow the same curvature of the spine towards the hip. And now let's construct the back legs. Here, at first, this part for the foot, which in this case remains at a constant width. And at the ankle, I have a sharp corner. And I'm curving around the joint. You can imagine a circle sitting here, and we're curving around it. So we have this S-curve. Then curving around towards the hip. And some indication for the hip itself too. Then also add a curve right here to connect these two parts and make this curve smoother. And the same down here too, a very small curve. To draw the belly, we start below the front knees and draw a curve upwards like so. And then another line that is kind of hanging down a little bit. Of course, it depends on how well fed this snow leopard is. And connect it here with this knee. And of course the tail, which is very fluffy and thick, and therefore we need to draw this very wide shape, curving around, following basically the first sketch, and the tip is round. Once again switching to the prepared version, looks significantly better now. And in order to explain how to draw the spots, let me skip ahead. Drawing all of these spots right now in real time would take too long, so instead let us have a close look together with the help of some sketches. So these here are made back then when I tried to better understand how the spots flow, as to say. Where you start from doesn't matter. Let's begin from above the eyes. You normally have a short line above the middle of the eyes, with a small gap. Then there are these lines of dots surrounding them. The dots converge towards the middle of the forehead, and the top of the head gets quite chaotic. Below the eyes you have these faint lines, make sure you leave a small narrow gap in between. From the outer eye corners you curve up and down. The nose and most of the area below the eyes remain spotless. You have a couple of spots at the sides of the face flowing down. Then typically you have these larger dark spots at the mouth corner, kind of fusing with the tiny dots from where the whiskers grew out of. The area on the chin right below the mouth is slightly spotty too. And some tiny details which still can make a significant difference are these small spots above the nose corners and below the inner eye corners. Continuing with the spots on the rest of the body, very typical for snow leopards are these rings. They are not perfect circles, but rather shaky and have gaps in between. Around the chest and legs they get progressively smaller on average and become more like simple spots again, rather than rings. You can see that the pattern curves inwards from the neck towards the chest. The chest, belly, backside of the legs, bottom of the tail, underside of the paws, and inner thighs remain spotless. When drawing the fur pattern, make sure to warp the spots and rings according to the shape of the body parts and the perspective. So for example, you can see that the pattern gets progressively flatter and denser towards the top of the back. And at the knee here, the spots warp around the curvature of the body shape. Last but not least, the tail. You basically have two rows. The first one continues the pattern of large rings down the tail. They become more and more squished together into thick lines, and at the end you have the black tip. The second row is much shorter, starting from the base of the tail and progressively getting smaller until about halfway down the tail. On the other side of the tail, which we cannot currently see, you have the same two rows. Next up, here is the colored version, at first without shading and highlighting, to only focus on the basic colors. I will not focus too much on the rendering part of the drawing process, since the style you draw your snow leopard in is up to you, but there are still some general things that I can tell you. The fur is mostly grey, it can also be slightly brown. White areas on the body would be the lower section of the tail and paws, the back sides of the legs, the inner thighs, the belly, and the chest. As for the face, white areas would be the chin and lower parts of the cheeks, the fluffy patches on the back side of the ears, which I mentioned before. The hair in front of the ears is also fairly bright, and the eyes are outlined with white below their eyes and the inner eye corners. Typically the white from the cheeks curves up the nose corners. The rest of the color shades can get a bit complex if you go very closely into detail. Here you can see that I attempted to draw a color map for that purpose. A little bit of an overkill. Some things you can remember. First of all, there is kind of a darker line curving along the forehead. The top of the head is in general darker, which also applies to the neck and torso. The colors get progressively brighter as they get closer to the white chest and belly. I already explained the colors of the eyes, and the nose has kind of a medium dark, grayish pink. It can also be darker. And the paw pads, by the way, are just simply dark gray, almost black. And now with the shading and highlighting included. Since snow leopards have such a long and dense fur, you don't see all that much of the muscle and bone structure underneath, compared to other cats like cheetahs. But you can still include some slight indications for the muscle shapes with shades and light reflections, in addition to the warping of the fur pattern. And that is basically it for this drawing of a very simple standing pose. Now I have a more dynamic pose prepared for the second drawing. And it is a cub, so I can also explain some of the differences between adults and cubs. I'm going to show you the drawing process in a time-lapse, while telling you a couple of interesting facts about snow leopards. And when it is done, we'll talk about the drawing, so let's go! The natural habitat lies deep within the mountains, where they're hard to find. From part of South Siberia all the way until the tall heights of the Himalayas. Their closest relatives are actually not leopards, but tigers. Having such large paws makes it easier for them to walk in deep snow and also muffles the sound of their movement when they hunt. Their short but wide nasal cavities heat up the air they breathe in, making them more resistant to the freezing environment. Snow leopards are unable to roar. Instead, they growl, yowl, and mew. In order to hunt in the mountains, they developed amazing balancing and climbing skills. They can even keep up with mountain goats, you know, those who jump around on almost vertical slopes. The number of snow leopards is estimated to be between 4,000 to 9,000 individuals. Making a more precise estimate is difficult due to the elusive nature of these cats. Like with many other cats, poaching is a huge problem. Especially their beautiful fur is highly popular on black markets in Asia. Wildlife trading in general needs to stop once and for all, for the protection of these fascinating creatures, the environment, and also to protect ourselves. Dangerous diseases can spread easily from those markets to all over the world. I am making this video during the time of a huge pandemic, when people worldwide need to self-isolate so that hospitals aren't getting completely overwhelmed. Hopefully, humans will learn something from this. Alright, let's talk about this drawing here. Compared to adult snow leopards, cubs have larger heads relative to their body size. The relative leg size is shorter, and the eyes and ears appear bigger, most of all their eyes. For especially young cubs, the feet can be even extra large. This one here is a bit older. Then some things about the stretching pose. You can clearly see the underside of the tail, which remains spotless. When cats stretch, they either extend their front or hind legs, not both sides at the same time. So this one here has its front legs stretched out real long, while the hind legs are still standing normally. Therefore, the front of the torso is quite low, and the spine curves up towards the hip. I explained more about typical cat poses in another tutorial video I made. So I am actually not completely done yet. There is one more drawing that I can show you, the special drawing I do for my tutorial topics as an extra. And here it is, an Okami fan art picture with a snow leopard as a celestial goddess. It also features Amaterasu, the protagonist of the game, and Masei Anella with her little bird Mifa. She does enjoyable gaming videos and streams, is a wonderful artist, and in general a really wholesome and nice person. If you by the way want to learn how to draw pine trees, or this wolf goddess here, I actually made tutorial videos about both. And if you want to learn more about how I made this drawing, what my ideas and choices were based on, and why I made this fan art for Masei, then you can watch the narrated timelapse video, which will come out 1 week after the release of this tutorial video, so stay tuned. So that's it for the tutorial. I was really looking forward to get to the snow leopards finally. They are so beautiful and cute at the same time. I love their super thick and fluffy fur. And out of the 4 cats of my big cat tutorial series, this one was by far the most anticipated one by most people. So I hope I did a good job and you liked this tutorial. If you did, then maybe consider sharing it with your friends who also like drawing or some art group. I normally don't say these kind of things along the lines of like, share, comment and subscribe and hit that bell. I think you all are very well capable of making your own decisions without me telling you. But I just wanted to give you a reminder because it actually is a significant support for me. Even if you only manage to convince one person to give my tutorials a try, your effort would be immensely appreciated and is another cornerstone in enabling me to produce more tutorial videos in the future. So thank you so much for watching. As always, if you have any questions or constructive feedback, then please leave a comment down below. And for more information and links, please check out the description of this video. There's quite a lot in there. Alright then, have fun drawing!